Today I'm gonna do a presentation about inflation forecast and economy outlook by analyzing CPI and PPI trend in the US economy. So the reason why I want to do this is inflation is a key focus in economy projects in general, and particularly during a post-pandemic recovery phase with wide price and swings and ongoing disrupting in global market. So in this presentation, I'm gonna examine the use of consumer price index and the producer price index in tracking inflation, and examines recent trend in the two index to determine where the US stands today. The report I'm gonna examine whether the country's economy is holding up or weaken, and focus the most likely direction in the next 12 months from information provided by Federal Reserve, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the research institution that study the economy. So basically, after COVID, the U.S. economy continued to change in the wake of a COVID-19 crisis, supply chain break, and a monetary tight measure. Inflation has also emerged to be a character feature of the main economy discussion in the country, ranging from family budget to Federal Reserve interest rate determination. The two most important measures to determine inflation include consumer price index and producer price index. Those two indexes give the insights of consumer and a producer price variation from the cracks of interrupting the states of the economy. So this presentation will try to analyze the fluctuation in CPAs and PPA and what is behind of them, and what's the information revealed regarding to the next 6 to 12 months. For that perspective, we look at whether the American economy is on the rise, level out, or headed toward a down circle. So firstly, we want to understand CPI and PPI. The consumer price index is a typical shift over time in the cost to urban consumer of a market basket of products and service. It impacts such things as housing, food, transportation, healthcare, and education. So CPA is commonly used to monitor the cost of living, and it's a major instruction of economy prediction and policy making. But the producer price index follow the average change in selling price received from domestic producer from their products, and capture inflation earlier in the production stage, and usually acts as a leading indicator of CPI because it's a little bit earlier than CPA, so it's an index. because increased coal cost production will normally result in a higher consumer price. Both CPI and PPI offer a complex perspective of price movement in the economy and serve to be a principal indicator of inflation tendency and of the soundness of the economy. So recent trend of CPI and PPI over the past few years, both CPI and PPI have shown a sign of deceleration after a peak in middle 2020. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the CPI rose by 3.2 year-over-year as of February 2024, down significant from its 0.1 peak in June 2022. The moderation in CPI was driven largely by easing price and stabilized food cost. However, core CPI, which exclude by loyalty, food and energy component, remain elevated at 4.1, reflect persistent inflation in health service and healthcare. Similarly, the PPI has also cooled. As of March 2024, the year-over-year PPI increase was 2.1, down from 11.3% in early 2022. The slowing pace of PPI growth suggests that producer input costs are stabilizing, which could help reduce consumer inflation in the coming months. However, sectors like construction, wholesale trade, and healthcare continue to experience high input cost potential, sustaining core inflation pressure. So we want to do a prediction of how the current economy condition is gonna be a decline or recovery. The U.S. economy appears to be transition from the rapid inflation of 22 toward more stable, tough caution recovery. Economy grew slow in 2023 but remained positive, with GDP expanding at annual rate of 2.1 in quarter 2 23. Labor market stayed resilient, with unemployment holding stay trending at around 3.8. Although labor force participation has not fully recovered to pre-pandemic level. While high interest rate has cooled the housing market and the consumer borrowing, inflation has started to moderate. This suggested that a Federal Reserve monetary tightening strategy has had a measurable impact. However, wage growth and housing costs still to fuel core inflation, complicating the Federal's path to its 2% inflation target. Therefore, the economy is not declining, but in a phase of a slowed recovery. Inflation is easy, but the progress is uneven across sector and demographic. Looking ahead, the economy forecast over the next 6 to 12 months is cautiously optimistic. Inflation is expected to continue to its downward trend. The Federal Reserve projects core to fall around 2.5 by early 25, assuming no major supply shock or any disruption. If PPI remains stable, CPI is likely to follow, especially as supply chain recover and consumer demand normalize. Interest rates are expected to remain elevated, but may be reduced in late 2024 if inflation continues to be cooling. A gradual ease of monetary policy could provide relief to sectors hit hardest by borrowing costs such as housing and construction. However, several risks persist. Energy prices remain unstable. Labor shortage in healthcare and logistics could pressure wage and global economy uncertainty, particularly in China and in Europe, could impact U.S. export and investment. Therefore, while the baseline scenario is one of the slow recovery, downside risk warrant closing monitor. The role of CPI and PPI. Both CPI and PPI play important role in shaping U.S. economy policy. The Federal Reserve closely monitors CPI data to determine interest rate adjustment. When CPI shows persistent inflation, the Federal typically raises interest rate to curb demand. Conversely, the drop of CPI might prompt the Federal to ease rate to stimulate growth. PPI, though less visible to the public, is essential to business and the policymaker to anticipate future consumer policy. A sharp rise in PPI typically precedes higher CPI, which means that a policymaker to use PPI to make it preemptive decision on monetary policy, taxation, and fiscal spending. Sector impact inflation. Some industries are more susceptible to inflationary pressure than others. For example, housing cost. Higher CPI in housing costs has decreased affordability dramatically, lessen residential mobility, and curb construction expanding. Retailer and the consumer goods. Increase in PPI raise the cost of input and typically result in higher consumer price and decrease in demand. Healthcare. Both PPI and CPI demonstrate persistent healthcare price growth in stressing household budget and government health finance. Energy. This is a very important sector that tend to be high short-term bursts of PPI, both PPI and CPI caused by oil price shock. Understanding those sectors is essential for anticipating how inflation would influence employment, investment, and consumption trend in the broader economy. The American economy is a care for recovery with. So the conclusion is the American economy is in a careful recovering with moderate inflation and stable labor market. While CPI and PPI had decreased from their 2022 peak, core inflation remained because of housing, wage growth, and industry-specific constraint. Projections over the next 6 to 12 months indicates a slowing of inflation and a possible stabilization in monetary policy, though there is a risk of future decline. CPI and PPI continue to be invaluable indicators in tracking inflation and informing economic policy. For policymaker firms and family alike, tracking the indicator offers valuable insight into shift economic terrain under sound and ongoing investment in supply chain stability and labor market. The U.S. economy is poised to build upon its gain and in its direction of recovery.